My keys were in the refrigerator again. I heard the little clink they made against the glass butter dish as Isabella pulled them out. She held them up between her thumb and forefinger, dangling them like some strange metallic fruit she'd just discovered. A little condensation had formed on the brass house key. "Oh, Mom," she said. Her voice was syrup-sweet, but it never reached her eyes. It never did. "See? You've put them in the cold again. You must have been so confused." She turned to Philip, my son, who was leaning against the counter, observing the little scene. He had that look on his face, a practiced, gentle concern that was about as real as a $3 bill. He nodded slowly, his eyes flicking from the keys to my face. "Mom, we're just worried," he added, his voice a soft echo of his wife's. "Maybe we should really make that appointment, just to talk to someone about your memory, for your own good." I didn't say anything. I just looked from my son's face to my daughter-in-law's. They stood there, a united front of feigned benevolence. I felt the weight of their performance settle in the quiet kitchen air, thick and suffocating. It was a good one today. The keys were a nice touch. Simple, classic, believable. So, I did what I always did. I gave a slow, tired nod. I let my shoulders slump, just a little. I let a flicker of confusion pass over my face, the way I'd seen actresses do it in old films. I played my part. "Yes," I said, my voice a little rough, as if I'd just woken up. "Maybe you're right." I didn't tell them that I had been awake until 2 a.m. the previous night, not with worry, but with a cold, clear purpose. I didn't tell them about the tiny camera, no bigger than my thumbnail, that I'd finally managed to sync with the old tablet I kept in my sewing room. A camera cleverly disguised as a USB charging block, plugged into the wall outlet in the living room. An outlet with a perfect, sweeping view of the entryway, the hall table where the key bowl sat, and, most importantly, the path to the kitchen. I didn't tell them that I'd watched the footage this morning before they even woke up. I saw Isabella moving like a shadow in the pre-dawn gloom, tiptoeing to the key bowl. I saw her pluck my keys out, her movements quick and certain. I saw Philip appear in the hallway, a robe tied loosely around his waist. I saw him whisper, "The fridge?" and saw her give a tiny, triumphant nod before she disappeared into the kitchen. I saw them rehearse their lines with their whispers and their gestures. They thought they were the directors of this little play. They had no idea I had the final cut. So I just nodded. I let Isabella place the cold, damp keys into my palm, her hand patting mine with a theatrical gentleness that made my skin crawl. I just waited. I was good at waiting. I had been waiting for months, letting them build their case against me brick by brick. Every misplaced object, every forgotten appointment, was another stone they were laying for my tomb of incompetence. They thought they were building my prison. They were building their own, and I was handing them the tools. After the key incident, they left me alone in the kitchen. They probably went into the living room to murmur about their success, to congratulate each other on another piece of evidence. I heard the low hum of their voices, the sound of the television turning on. The house settled back into its false peace. I sat down at this very table, right where I am now. The floral-patterned vinyl of the chair was cool against my legs. For a long moment, I just stared at my hands, resting on the wooden surface. These hands, they looked old, of course. The skin is thin, like parchment, and the veins are raised like blue rivers on a map of a land I no longer recognize. But these hands, they are not weak. These were the hands that held my husband, Arthur, when he took his last breath in this very house. These were the hands that signed the papers to pay off the mortgage 30 years ago. These hands raised a son, my Philip, cooked thousands of meals, and planted the rose bushes that still bloom every June under the kitchen window. And these hands, I remembered with a sudden, sharp clarity, were the ones that so carefully cleaned and cared for my mother's jewelry collection. Arthur's wedding gift to me was the final, perfect piece, an emerald necklace with a clasp so intricate he always had to be the one to fasten it for me. The collection was my history. My mother's sapphires, my grandmother's diamond brooch. Over $100,000, the appraiser had said a few years ago. Not that the money mattered. It was the legacy. The stories locked in the facets of each stone. According to Arthur's will, a document as solid as his love for me, that collection was mine and mine alone. It could only be sold with my explicit consent, or, in the event that I was declared mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. It was a standard clause, the lawyer had told us. A protection. How funny. A clause meant to protect me was now the very weapon being used to destroy me. The idea hadn't come to them overnight. It had been a slow poison. It started after Philip lost his job for the second time. He had a taste for things he couldn't afford, and Isabella had a hunger for them. I had started hearing their arguments, hushed but sharp, seeping through the walls at night. Words like debt, opportunity, and that collection just sitting there. Then, the accidents began. Small things at first. My reading glasses would vanish, only to be found in the sugar bowl. "Oh, Mom, how silly of you," Isabella would laugh, a sound like breaking glass. A pot left to burn on the stove because, apparently, I had wandered off and forgotten it, though I had no memory of even putting it there. Philip had rushed in to turn off the burner, his face a mask of heroic concern as the smoke alarm shrieked. They were so clever. They never accused me directly. It was always couched in love, in worry. That was the most sickening part. It wasn't an open attack, but a slow, methodical erosion of my reality, designed to make me doubt myself. And for a while, in the beginning, I almost did. Was I getting that forgetful? Was this what it was like to lose your mind, piece by agonizing piece? But then came the incident with my friend Carol. We had a standing lunch date, first Tuesday of every month for 20 years. I was sitting in my coat, waiting by the door. Carol never came. I called her later that evening, my heart heavy with a strange dread. "Genevieve, what happened?" she'd asked, her voice tight with worry. I called and called. Isabella answered and said you'd had a fall, and the doctor advised you to rest. She said she'd let you know I called. I had not fallen. The doctor had not been called. I was perfectly fine. I remember hanging up the phone, the receiver feeling heavy as a stone in my hand. The lie was so clean, so complete. It wasn't about misplaced keys anymore. This was isolation. This was a deliberate severing of my connections to the outside world, to anyone who could vouch for my sanity. That was the night the last of my grief and confusion burned away, leaving something cold and hard in its place. It was the night I stopped being a victim and became a strategist. I was a spy in my own home. I ordered the camera that night, using the old tablet Arthur had bought me. I paid extra for the fastest shipping. And I went to the bookstore and bought a simple, leather-bound journal. A diary. I hid it in the hollowed-out center of an old, heavy cookbook on the shelf, The Joy of Cooking. The irony was not lost on me. Every night, after they were asleep, I would take it down. Under the dim light of the little lamp on this table, I documented everything. I became the archivist of their campaign of cruelty. I made myself write it all down. No matter how small or humiliating. My hand still shakes a little when I remember writing those first entries. October 12th. Isabella found my pearl earrings in the trash can. Said I must have swept them off the dresser by mistake. She looked so pleased when she washed them off for me. Philip suggested we get one of those pill organizers, the ones with the days of the week, because he was worried I'd forget my heart medication next. October 19th. My phone was unplugged all night. I missed a call from the bank about a suspected fraudulent charge. When I asked, Philip said I must have done it myself. Sometimes you unplug things without realizing it, Mom. He spent the rest of the day on the phone fixing the problem, painting himself as the responsible son cleaning up my messes. November 4th. They held a family dinner. My nephew David was there. Before he arrived, Isabella took me aside and gently told me not to talk about Arthur, because it confuses me and I tend to get the details wrong and it upsets people. Throughout the dinner, anytime I tried to speak, she or Philip would jump in and finish my sentences, or laugh and say, "Oh, Mom's stories," as if I were a charming but senile child. I saw the look of pity on David's face. They were poisoning the well. They were turning everyone against me, one concerned smile at a time. Each entry was a nail, each fabricated incident a piece of their carefully constructed narrative. And with every word I wrote, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about the jewelry anymore. It was about my name, my life, the woman Arthur loved. They were trying to erase her, to replace her with a feeble, confused old woman who needed to be cared for. They didn't understand. You don't live 78 years without learning a thing or two about survival. You don't watch the man you love fade away without learning the true meaning of strength. My battle with grief had forged me in a fire they couldn't possibly imagine. Their little games were child's play. I was fighting for my life, for my sanity, and for my past. Each little performance they staged was just another scene in the film I was secretly producing. A film for an audience of one. A judge. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in self-control. By day, I was the woman they were creating. A little slower, a little more distant. I would forget where I put my reading glasses. I would ask Philip to repeat the name of the show he was watching. I let my sentences trail off sometimes, as if the thought had simply evaporated from my mind. I was a ghost in my own home, and they were the ones haunting it. But at night, when the house was steeped in a silence that felt both peaceful and menacing, I came alive. I'd slip into my sewing room, the old tablet and its charger my only companions. The camera I'd bought had a simple rolling recording feature. Every 24 hours, it would start to record over the oldest footage. So, every night, I became an archivist. I'd plug the charger into the tablet and carefully review the day's events. Most of it was mundane, the mailman at the door, the cat sleeping in a patch of Sunday. But then there were the moments, the little gems of their deception. I would watch Isabella move my wallet from my purse to a bookshelf behind a row of old encyclopedias. I'd watch Philip accidentally turn down the ringer on my phone. Each incident was a small, dark pearl, and I was stringing them together. I saved each clip, labeling them by date and event, transferring them to a single tiny USB flash drive. It was a sleek, black little thing, no bigger than a stick of gum. It lived in a small, zippered pocket inside my purse, a secret I carried with me everywhere. And then, one Tuesday evening, I found it, the masterpiece, the one piece of footage that I knew would change everything. I was watching the recording from the previous afternoon. They thought I was napping. On the screen, I saw them in the living room, standing near the hall table. Isabella was holding my favorite photograph of Arthur, the one from our trip to the coast, in its heavy silver frame. "Okay, try it again," I heard her say, her voice crisp and directorial. Philip took the frame from her. He looked uncomfortable, his shoulders hunched. This feels wrong, Izzy. It's for her own good, darling. And ours, she cooed. Now, your line is, Mom, why did you put Dad's picture in the linen closet? I found it under the towels. Are you trying to hide him away? Say it with that worried tremor in your voice, the one you used when the pot burned. He cleared his throat. Mom, why? Why did you put this in the closet? He sounded like a child, reciting a poem. Isabella let out an exasperated sigh. I could see her roll her eyes on the tiny screen. No, Philip, no. Softer, more concern. Think of a sad puppy. Try it again. Remember, her memory is failing. She's fragile. We are the loving, worried children. That's the role we are playing. He tried again, his voice cracking with false emotion. She clapped her hands together lightly. Perfect. See? You're a natural. We'll do it tomorrow morning. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the tablet illuminating my face. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel rage. What washed over me was a profound, chilling calm. It was the feeling of a hunter who has just seen the prey walk directly into the center of a perfectly laid trap. They weren't just liars, they were amateur actors. And they had just handed me a recording of their dress rehearsal. I saved the clip, labeling it simply, the rehearsal. I ejected the flash drive, the small click echoing in the silent room. That little piece of plastic and metal in my hand felt heavier than gold. It was my truth, my weapon, my vindication. The next step was clear. I needed a professional. I needed a chief of staff, as Arthur used to call his most trusted advisors. Getting out of the house alone was a challenge. They watched me, always under the guise of caring for me. So I created an opportunity. I mentioned to Isabella that my old friend Margaret from the church book club was having a difficult time and that I wanted to drop off a casserole. It was the perfect excuse. It painted me as a caring, traditional woman, a role they approved of. It was also completely believable. Isabella even helped me make the casserole, humming to herself as she chopped the onions. But I didn't drive to Margaret's. I drove downtown, to the quiet, oak-paneled office of Arthur's old estate lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies. He was a younger man, but he had a kind, serious face. He greeted me with a polite smile, offering me coffee, his expression one of gentle sympathy for the recent widow. "How can I help you, Genevieve?" he asked, folding his hands on his large desk. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I opened my purse and took out the USB drive. "I have a situation with my son and his wife," I said, my voice even. "And I believe they are preparing to file a petition to have me declared incompetent." His eyebrows shot up. "That's a very serious allegation, Genevieve. It requires substantial proof of—" "I know what it requires," I interrupted gently, "and I believe they are manufacturing that proof. I'd like you to see something." I handed him the drive. He looked at it, then at me, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He plugged it into his laptop. I directed him to the file labeled "The Rehearsal." I watched his face as he watched the screen. I saw his polite, professional mask crumble. The soft sympathy in his eyes hardened into sharp, focused anger. He leaned closer to the screen, his jaw tight. When the clip ended, he looked up at me, and I saw a completely different man. The condescending pity was gone, replaced by a profound, steely respect. "My God," he whispered. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "They were rehearsing." "They have been for months," I replied. "I have dozens of other clips, misplaced items, faked phone calls, and I have a journal. He was silent for a long moment, just staring at the black flash drive on his desk. "This is monstrous," he finally said. "Genevieve, you are a remarkable woman." "I'm a cornered woman, Mr. Davies," I corrected him. "That's not the same thing. Now, my question for you is this. What do we need to make this hold the most weight in court? I don't want to just win. I want this to be definitive." He became my chief of staff right then and there. We spent the next hour outlining a strategy. It was my strategy, really. He just gave it the legal framework. The plan was simple. Do nothing. Wait. Let them make the next move. Let them file their petition. Let them present their evidence and their twisted narrative to a judge. Let them build their case so high that the fall would be all the more spectacular. "They'll want you to see a doctor for a cognitive evaluation," he warned. "They'll try to use a specialist of their choosing." "I know," I said, "and I'll go." That was the part that truly felt like a high-stakes poker game. 2 weeks later, Philip and Isabella sat me down at the kitchen table. Their faces were solemn, their voices soft. They had found a renowned geriatric specialist, Dr. Albright, and had already made an appointment for me. "It's just a conversation, Mom," Philip said, placing his hand over mine. His skin felt clammy. "Just to get a baseline, to make sure we're doing everything we can to help you." I looked at my son, at the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle and bait a fishing hook, and I felt a pang of something cold and hollow. But it passed. I was playing for my life now. "Of course, dear," I said, giving his hand a weak pat. "If you think it's for the best." The day of the appointment, I was calm. I sat in the sterile, beige-colored office and answered the doctor's questions. I drew the face of a clock and set the hands to 10 past 11. I recalled a list of 5 random words: river, suitcase, trumpet, shadow, key 15 minutes after he'd told them to me. I answered questions about my past, about current events, about Arthur. I spoke about my grief, but with clarity and coherence. I was not a woman losing her mind. I was a woman who had lost her husband. I knew I had done well. The doctor, a man with tired but intelligent eyes, gave me a small, reassuring smile at the end. When we got the results back, Philip and Isabella were visibly confused. The report stated that while I showed signs of normal age-related memory recall issues, I was sharp, lucid, and fully capable of managing her own affairs. I watched them read it at the dining room table. Isabella's face tightened. "Well," she said, forcing a bright smile. "She must have just been having a good day. We know what the bad days are like, don't we, Philip?" He nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Yes, the bad days are very bad." They were in too deep to turn back now. Their greed had blinded them. They had their story, and they were sticking to it. They would twist the doctor's report, frame it as a single snapshot in a larger picture of my decline. And so they went all in. A week later, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friend or a delivery. It was a process server. He handed me a thick, legal-sized envelope. I took it with a steady hand and closed the door. I didn't need to open it immediately. I knew what it was. It was their petition to the court, the official beginning of the end. I walked back to the kitchen, laid the envelope on the table, and put the kettle on for tea. They had laid all their cards on the table: a stack of lies, a twisted doctor's report, and a list of anecdotes about my failing mind. They thought they had a winning hand, but I was holding the royal flush, and it was stored on a tiny black USB drive, waiting silently in my purse. The game was about to get interesting. The tea was long since steeped. I sat at the kitchen table, the thick, cream-colored envelope lying in front of me like a sleeping snake. It had the county's official seal in the top corner. It felt heavy, not just with the weight of the papers inside, but with the weight of its purpose. It was a formal declaration that my own son believed I was no longer a whole person. I took a slow sip of my tea. It was Earl Grey, Arthur's favorite. The scent of bergamot always calmed me, and I needed to be calm now more than ever. My hands were perfectly steady as I picked up a butter knife and slit the envelope open with a neat, precise motion. The language inside was cold, brutal in its formality. A string of legal terms: petition, conservatorship, incapable, unsound mind, all marching down the page. At the bottom was the name of their petitioner, Philip Miller, my son. My signature was on his birth certificate. Now his was on a document designed to strip me of my own name, my own agency. I read every word. I folded the papers neatly and slid them back into the envelope. I finished my tea. Then I waited. They came to me that evening, after dinner. They staged it in the living room. Isabella had me sit in my usual armchair while she and Philip sat opposite me on the sofa, leaning forward with identical expressions of grave concern. The envelope was on the coffee table between us. "Mom," Philip began, his voice rehearsed and soft. He cleared his throat. "We need to talk about something." Isabella placed a hand on his knee, a small proprietary gesture. "What Philip is trying to say, Genevieve, is that we've taken a necessary step for your protection." She gestured towards the envelope. "We've filed some papers with the court." I looked from her face to my son's. I let a flicker of confusion, of weary hurt, cross my features. It was a role I had perfected over the past few months. "Papers? What sort of papers?" "It's a conservatorship petition," Isabella said, her voice smooth as oil. "It sounds scary, but it's not. It's just a legal way for us to help you, to manage your finances, your health care, to make sure you're safe. We've noticed you've been struggling, and we're so worried you'll be taken advantage of. Or that you'll hurt yourself," Philip added, his eyes pleading. He was a good actor. I had to give him that. He almost looked like he believed it himself. "The doctor's report said you were lucid that day, but we know it's not always like that. We know about the bad days. We see them. We just want a safety net in place." I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I looked down at my hands clasped in my lap. I looked at the photograph of Arthur on the mantelpiece. Then I looked back at them, my audience. I summoned a deep, tired sigh that seemed to come from the very marrow of my bones. "A court?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You're taking me to court?" "It's just a hearing, Mom. A formality," Isabella said quickly. "The judge will hear our concerns, see the evidence we've collected, all the little incidents, the doctor's report, and he'll agree that this is what's best for you." I looked at my son, and for a fleeting second, I didn't see the weak, grasping man before me. I saw the little boy with scraped knees who used to run to me for comfort. I saw the teenager I taught to drive in our old Buick. The image wavered and vanished, replaced by the puppet sitting before me, a puppet on his wife's strings. The last vestiges of my maternal hurt withered and died in that moment, replaced by the cold, clear ice of resolve. "Well," I said, letting my shoulders slump in defeat, "if you think it's for the best." The relief that washed over their faces was almost comical. It was a physical thing. Philip's shoulders relaxed. Isabella's smile, though still meant to be sympathetic, had a sharp, triumphant edge. They had done it. They had broken me. The old woman had finally surrendered. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It was no longer a quiet battlefield of psychological warfare. It was a victory lap. Their triumph was a palpable presence in the air. They were sickeningly attentive, cloyingly sweet. They spoke to me in the slow, simple sentences one might use for a toddler or a pet. They were no longer trying to prove I was incompetent. In their minds, it was now a legal fact, waiting to be rubber-stamped. Their guard was completely down. They saw me as a problem that had been solved, a relic that had been safely catalogued. And that's when Isabella made her mistake. It was 2 nights before the court date. I couldn't sleep, but I wasn't anxious. I was preparing. I lay in bed, going over my plan, my words, my testimony. Around 1 a.m., I felt a familiar urge to check the camera footage. It had become a ritual, my nightly intelligence briefing. I slipped into my sewing room and powered up the tablet. I scrolled through the day's recordings, and then I saw it. The footage was from that afternoon, while I was supposedly taking my nap. The camera's view showed the hallway leading to my bedroom. The door creaked open. Isabella slipped inside. She was in my room for nearly 10 minutes. My heart, which had been so steady, gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. What was she doing? Planting more evidence? She emerged a few minutes later, and the camera caught her as she paused in the hallway, perhaps thinking she was safe from view. She wasn't. She was looking at her reflection in the gilded hallway mirror. And around her neck, gleaming even in the dim, grainy footage, was Arthur's wedding gift to me, my emerald necklace. She turned her head from side to side, admiring the way the stones caught the light. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a conqueror. She touched the central stone, a large, deep green emerald, with the tip of her finger. She was wearing my history. She was trying on my life for size, and she clearly found that it fit her quite well. I watched, frozen. This was so much more than the keys in the refrigerator. This was a desecration. That necklace was the last thing Arthur had ever fastened around my neck. His hands had touched that clasp. His love was in those stones, and she was wearing it like a trophy she had already won. I saved the clip. I labeled it, "The Inheritance." I sat in the dark for a very long time after that. The image of her smiling face in the mirror, adorned with my emeralds, burned behind my eyelids. It clarified everything. It stripped away any lingering sentiment, any last shred of doubt about the path I had chosen. This wasn't a family squabble. It wasn't about a son worried for his mother. It was about appetite. A raw, naked greed that had consumed my son and was now personified in the woman he had married. The court summons lay on my bedside table. I'd looked at it every night before turning off the light. For them, it was a legal document outlining their inevitable victory. A ticket to my jewels, my home, my life. But as I finally went back to bed that night, the cold fire of resolve burning in my chest, I saw it for what it truly was. It was not a summons. It was an invitation to the premiere of a film I had directed, produced, and starred in, and I was ready for the final, devastating scene. The morning of the hearing, they treated me with a soft, suffocating care. Isabella helped me pick out a dress, a simple, gray one. "We want you to look respectable, but frail, you understand," she'd murmured, her hands fussing with the collar. Philip made me toast, cutting off the crusts as if I were a child. They were leading me out the door, one on each arm, their hands gripping me with a firmness that was meant to feel supportive but felt like a cage. They thought they were escorting a confused old woman to her final surrender. They thought they were leading a lamb to the slaughter. They had no idea they were walking into the lion's den, and the lion was very, very patient. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, and smelled faintly of old paper and furniture polish. It was all dark wood and muted colors, designed to feel solemn and important. Philip and Isabella sat beside their lawyer at one table. I sat at the other with Mr. Davies. They kept glancing over at me, their expressions a perfect blend of pity and resolve. They were playing their roles right up to the very end. Their lawyer, a slick man with hair that looked permanently wet, stood up first. He painted a masterful picture of my decline. He spoke of my increasingly erratic behavior, my episodes of confusion, and my inability to safely manage my daily life. He presented their evidence with a somber flourish. There was a list of incidents, a logbook of my supposed failings, the misplaced glasses, the burned pot, the missed appointments. Each one was presented as a stepping stone on my inevitable path to incompetence. He then called Philip to the stand. My son. He walked slowly, his shoulders slumped, the very image of a heartbroken child forced to make a terrible decision. His voice was thick with manufactured emotion as he answered his lawyer's questions. "Can you describe your mother's state of mind, Mr. Miller?" She's fading," Philip said, his voice cracking. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. "She gets lost in the middle of sentences. She forgets things, important things. We found her car keys in the refrigerator one morning. She has no memory of putting them there. We're just so afraid she's going to hurt herself." Then it was Isabella's turn. She was even better. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief as she spoke of her deep affection for me and the pain it caused her to watch me deteriorate. "I try to help her," she said, her voice a soft, tragic whisper. "But she gets so confused. One day I found her most precious necklace, a family heirloom, just lying on her dresser, completely unsecured. Anyone could have walked in and taken it. She simply doesn't understand the value of things anymore. We are terrified she will lose everything." She looked directly at the judge, a man with a stern, tired face who had seen, I was sure, every flavor of human drama. He listened impassively, making occasional notes on a legal pad. As I listened to them weave their web of lies, I felt strangely detached. It was like watching a play for which I already knew the ending. There was no anger, no pain. There was only a quiet, waiting stillness inside me. I did not look at them. I kept my eyes fixed on the grain of the wooden table in front of me, tracing the patterns with my gaze. Finally, their lawyer rested his case. "The petitioners believe, Your Honor, that the evidence is clear. Mrs. Genevieve Miller, while a beloved mother and mother-in-law, is no longer capable of managing her own affairs. We ask the court to grant the conservatorship for her own safety and well-being." The judge turned his tired eyes to our table. "Mr. Davies?" Mr. Davies rose slowly. He was a tall man, and he seemed to fill the space around him with a calm, unshakable authority. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear and steady, "my client, Mrs. Miller, will not be taking the stand. We do not believe it's necessary to subject her to a cross-examination. We have only one piece of evidence we would like to present to the court. We believe it will clarify the situation entirely." I saw a flicker of confusion on the other lawyer's face. Philip and Isabella exchanged a look of smug certainty. A single piece of evidence? What could the confused old woman possibly have? "We have a video file on this USB drive," Mr. Davies continued, holding up the small, black device. "With the court's permission,